The small town of Lost Creek, Wyoming, was a scar on the pale, unforgiving face of the land. It smelled perpetually of dry dust that had not seen rain in what felt like a lifetime. The sweet, metallic scent of the hot springs just outside of town, and the slow, inescapable decay of the old railroad ties. We were famous for nothing really, just gravel, rusting trailers, and the kind of relentless, scraping wind that never stopped howling like a beast trapped just outside your window, eternally hungry. My childhood was staked out in this unforgiving place. I was raised by a single mother, a woman with eyes the color of faded denim, who valued quiet obedience above all else. She had only one unbreakable, sacred law for me, a constraint she imposed not with anger, but with a paralyzing cold dread. Never, under any circumstances, go near the trailer belonging to old Silas Crane. Silas lived not just on the edge of town, but beyond it, right where the scrub brush met the low, oily shimmer of East Hollow Lake. He was a creature of true solitude, a hermit who scratched out a living in the deepest shadows, moving through other people's trash cans at night, sifting for things he could salvage, resell, or twist into something new and strange. People whispered about him, their voices turning thin and brittle, like winter ice cracking beneath their weight when they spoke his name. The whispers always circled back to the same dark stain from decades past. Silas had killed a boy, and he had somehow, miraculously, walked away free. "He's a monster," my mother would hiss, her face twisting into a mask of pure aversion, the familiar grief etched deep beneath her skin. The victim, she had told me once, had been her close friend in high school, a shining boy full of life that had been snuffed out in a second of brutal, random violence. That was all she would ever tell me, her lips pressing together in a hard line, the trauma too heavy to lift again. I figured the silence was just her way of protecting herself from the hurt. Over the years, I pieced together the gruesome folklore like shards of broken glass. I learned Silas was one of those who had volunteered for the distant, muddy hell of the Vietnam War, seeking something he couldn't find back home. When he finally returned, the boy who left had been replaced by a vacant shell, the essential light in his eyes extinguished forever. He settled his dilapidated trailer near the black water of East Hollow Lake. Old-timers warned me, not unkindly, never to go near the north side after dark, claiming Silas would most likely be out there with his rifle, hunting squirrels for his next night's pathetic meal. "Don't want him mistaking you for a rabbit in the gloom, do you, son?" they would say, their smiles never reaching their eyes, leaving the silent assurance that they were absolutely, chillingly serious. But not everyone treated him like the boogeyman. Some people in Lost Creek seemed to pity him, a fact that always confused me. I remember being about 14, riding in the rusted-out pickup with my friend Luke and his mother, Mrs. Peterson. Luke brought up Silas Crane, painting him as the pure embodiment of evil, something to be feared by all children. "That poor man," Mrs. Peterson sighed suddenly, shaking her head as she navigated the cracked asphalt of Main Street. "All he truly wants is to be left alone." "But Mom," Luke insisted, his voice rising, "he murdered someone. You know he did." Her face changed then, a quick, unsettling shift that I would remember for years, as if she was slamming a heavy iron door over a blazing furnace of truth. "She did," she said, her voice turning cold and unnaturally flat, the mask of community disapproval snapping into place. "And you stay the heck away from that trailer, young man. You hear me?" The conversation ended there, leaving us with the unsettling feeling that we had caught her protecting a dark, unspeakable secret, a thing I wouldn't fully understand or process until years later. By the time I was 17, my simple childhood fear had curdled into a genuine, festering hatred. Old Silas Crane was without question the devil in the lonely hills outside our town. The full story, the poison I needed to justify my rage, came out on a cold, wet Friday night. My mother was not an alcoholic, but she was a devout worshiper of Friday night wine, often settling in to watch the melodramas on the television. I got home late from a friend's house, finding her slumped at the kitchen table, weeping silently over a stack of faded, crinkled photographs of her high school years. In almost every picture, there was Mike, the boy Silas had killed, smiling from beyond the veil. She told me, through hiccuping tears and wine-clouded sentences, how close they were. Mike was a good guy, aside from partying a little too hard, and he absolutely did not deserve to die young, or in such a terrifying way. Mike had been drinking out near East Hallow Lake with a couple other friends. He wandered off from the group, stepping into the dense, silent bushes to take a leak, and that's when he saw it. A man walking through the shadows, carrying what looked exactly like the limp form of a small child draped over his shoulder. Mike, fueled by adrenaline and alcohol, yelled the challenge at the retreating figure. The man started running into the darkness with the child. Mike and his buddies gave chase, tearing through the scrub brush. Mike was in the lead. When they finally caught up, the man dropped the child, dropped her like a discarded toy, spun around, and lit Mike up with a terrifying, rapid succession of bang, 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 bang. The poor guy was dead before he hit the dirt. The child, rescued from the bushes, was taken to the hospital. But the victory was short-lived. She died soon after, the doctor confirming her system was ravaged by a massive dose of tranquilizers that had damaged her organs beyond repair. Every kid drinking out near the lake that night swore it was old Silas Crane who fired the shots. And yet, incomprehensibly, Silas was never arrested. He never spent a single night in jail. The mystery was solved. The hatred was justified. It finally made total, terrible sense why everyone either feared or hated the man. Maybe Luke's mother didn't know the full, bloody story, but I did. And as the months crawled by, this raw, youthful hatred festered until it became a physical weight, pressing me down, urging me toward action. I told my friends every lurid detail. They knew how much this trauma had shadowed my mother's life. Then, sitting around the campfire one night, I brought up the idea of doing something. One of the guys mentioned he'd asked his father about the dead girl, the one who died from the overdose. His father confirmed the tragic story, noting that people in Lost Creek truly hated to talk about it, lest the girl's broken mother appear behind them in a store aisle. But there was one weird detail his father had mentioned. The girl had not been found near the lake. She had simply appeared, dropped off in the middle of town. That small deviation, that flickering detail did not matter to us. It did not matter to me. The core truth remained. Mike was dead, the girl was dead, and old Silas Crane had done it all and walked away. He needed to pay. That night, beneath the cold, indifferent eye of the Wyoming sky, I hatched the plan. I would hike out to the trailer in the middle of the night, watch it until every sound of life ceased, and then I would set the structure on fire. Yes, I know, it was stupid, reckless, born of teenage fury and a desire for vengeful closure. In my young mind, the fantasy was clear. I would set the fire, run, and Silas would be forced to flee his domain, mad and defeated, having to move someplace else and live in fear. It took me time to gather the courage, and more time to acquire the necessary fuel. Since I had no money, I stole the large can of paint thinner from the school's perpetually unlocked art supply room. One Friday night, I lied to my friends, telling them I was headed straight home after our usual campfire ritual. Instead, I headed toward the dark water. The walk around the lake was terrifying, a full hour of solitude where every snap of a twig sounded like a footstep behind me. When I was within a half-mile, I extinguished my small flashlight, plunging myself into a sudden, suffocating darkness that swallowed sound. I traced the edge of the water, my eyes straining until I spotted the familiar lonely light spilling from Silas's trailer in the distance. I kept to the plan. I watched the trailer for 45 agonizing minutes. The dim light stayed on until finally the sound of a television, distant but distinct, cut out. The light vanished. Everything became silent and utterly still. I gave it 2 more minutes, my heart hammering a brutal rhythm against my ribs, convinced the old man had fallen asleep. Then I unzipped my backpack, pulled out the cold can of paint thinner, and began to creep toward the trailer. I was shaking by the time I was within a few feet. The heavy scent of pine and damp earth was cut by the faint, coppery scent of the lake. The trailer remained silent, a tomb in the wilderness. I was about to pop the lid off the can when I heard it, a distinct, loud click to my right, the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. "What you got there, boy?" The voice was a low, chilling rasp right beside me. I froze, paralyzed by pure terror. It was Silas. He had caught me red-handed, a teenager about to commit a deadly crime. I couldn't speak, knowing that once he understood my murderous intent, he would surely blow my brains out without a second thought. Silas told me to drop the can. When it hit the dirt with a hollow metallic thud, I saw the beam of a tiny flashlight settle on the container. He knew. "Turn around," he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. "I want to see your face before I kill you." My body refused to move. The fear had locked my muscles. In the next instant, he rushed me, spinning me around with surprising, shocking speed. I fell backwards, landing hard on the rough, cold ground. Silas stood over me, his face a shadow, but his eyes visible, staring down the barrel of his rifle. Then he lowered the gun. He simply looked at me for what felt like an eternity. I wanted to beg, to scream for my life, but my throat was closed shut. Out of the blue, he spoke my full name, not as a question, but as a confirmation. The confusion broke through the fear. He knew me. He knew my mother. I confirmed who I was, and he spoke the words that would change everything. "I wondered how long it'd be before you showed up." My voice finally returned, thin and broken. "How'd you know me?" He invited me inside his trailer, promising to tell me everything, a promise that felt more terrifying than any threat. Inside, the trailer was cramped, cluttered, but surprisingly clean. Once we were sitting, he asked what my mother had told me about him. I regained my furious courage and told him, blow for blow, how I hated him, recounting my mother's version of the night Mike died. He didn't interrupt, but merely smiled, a thin, unnerving crescent that did not touch his eyes. When I finished, he told me the truth, speaking with the cold, clinical distance of a man reliving a nightmare he couldn't escape. "Okay, kid, this is what really happened. My mother's friend Mike," Silas explained, "was deeply troubled, a burgeoning predator whose sickness only intensified as he aged. He'd been expelled from school for grotesque acts, and in the months before his death, he had been observed talking to young children around town, claiming he was just playing with them. On the night of the shooting, it was not Silas walking near the lake with a child over his shoulder. It was my mother's high school friend, Mike. The situation happened in almost complete reverse. Silas had been out hunting when he came across Mike and his friends, all drunk, moving through the shrubbery by the water. Silas watched, hidden, and listened to their awful drunken plans. He realized one of the boys, Mike, was carrying an unconscious child. Silas flicked on his flashlight and commanded them to drop the child. Mike pulled a knife. He was halfway to plunging it into the girl's chest when Silas put 2.22 rounds through Mike's torso. Silas said he didn't get a good look at the other kids, but they ran off into the night.
He picked up the unconscious girl and carried her all the way into town, leaving her at the old gas station with the night shift clerk. He told the clerk there was a body out near the lake and that the police should find Robert Barnes because he was the killer. The police came. Silas's story checked out. The missing girl's parents, relieved, thanked him. To them, he was a hero, but he didn't feel like one. He had broken the one solemn vow he had made to himself since returning from Vietnam. Worse, the girl died anyway, and the real monsters got away. "That's why I stayed away from town," he whispered, his eyes fixed on some middle distance. "I didn't want to stand around the grown-up versions of the little monsters who got away with ending that girl's life. I don't know who they all were, but I figured there was a pretty good chance your mother was one of them." He said he did not care if I believed him or not. He only asked one final terrible favor. "Go home, tell your mother what I just told you, and then look her dead in the eye and ask if it is all true." I did exactly that. And while it's best not to describe the screams, the terrifying, raw, animalistic fury of her denial, and the things that were said between us blow for blow, let us just say our relationship never recovered. She is the reason I haven't been back to that dusty, haunted corner of Wyoming in almost 20 years now. And the black water of East Hollow Lake, I suspect, still holds the secrets of who the real monsters were that terrible, bloody night.
In the summer of 2002, my boyfriend, whose name I will call Mark, and I were driving east, cutting across the vast flat belly of America. Our destination was Havenwood, South Dakota, a small town where Mark's parents lived. We'd been driving for nearly 7 hours since leaving Chicago, and the landscape had become a monotonous, endless tunnel of high, dense cornfields flanking Interstate 80. It was just past noon when the corn abruptly ended. It was not a gradual change, but a sudden, shocking transition. It felt precisely like stepping out of a dark, suffocating forest and into a vast open plain. But the plain was wrong. Instead of healthy green earth, all we could see stretching out to the horizon was ash, black earth, and charred stalks. A colossal fire had swept through this part of Iowa. Mark, trying to sound knowledgeable and calm, muttered something about farmers sometimes burning their fields intentionally to prepare the soil for a new cycle. But even his explanation could not dispel the deep, unsettling creepiness of the scene. The world had turned into a charcoal drawing. Before this point, we could barely see 10 feet beyond the shoulder of the highway. Now the visibility was immense. It was this unnerving, absolute clarity that made the sightings so easy and so devastating. Far off to our right, deep within the scarred field, I saw them, a man and a small boy, walking hand in hand through the blackened stubble. I could only see them as dark, tiny figures at first, but the tableau they created was stark against the monochrome landscape. It looked like something pulled from a long-forgotten sentimental calendar. An old man, perhaps a grandfather, taking his grandson out for a quiet, wholesome walk to show him the destruction wrought by the flames. They were moving deliberately, headed toward what looked like an old, isolated well house in the middle of the scorched acreage. I did not mention the sight to Mark. We had settled into that comfortable, quiet rhythm of a long road trip, content to listen to the radio and watch the miles devour themselves. I just watched, mesmerized as the little scene played out, zooming in on the figures as our car ate up the highway. The entire world was just us, the road, and that single, horrifying domestic image playing out in the distance. By the time the sedan was nearly upon them, the clarity was almost painful. I could see the old man in sharp relief. He wore faded blue denim overalls, his hair was dark but thinning on top, and his gait was slow and measured. The boy was tiny, a flash of blue shirt against the soot, with bright white sneakers and a shock of almost white curly blonde hair. They reached the structure. The well stood alone, a dark cylinder in a dead field. And then, as we drove right past them, separated by maybe 100 yards of asphalt and burned soil. I saw it. I saw it with a horrifying, sickening clarity that burned the image forever onto the back of my eyelids. The old man paused beside the well, lifted the small blond boy up as if preparing to swing him onto his shoulders, and then, with a terrible casual violence, he simply tossed the child down the well shaft. "Oh my God," I screamed, the sound tearing out of my throat, a raw, shocked explosion that shattered the car's quiet atmosphere. Mark slammed on the brakes, the car fishtailing slightly on the shoulder. "What the hell is going on? What is it?" he yelled, panicked. He had been focused solely on the road, zoned out, seeing nothing but the pavement in front of him. I was frantic, scrabbling through my bag, searching blindly for my cell phone. A primal thought flashed through my mind. Stop the car! Go back! But another image, colder and far more immediate, immediately replaced it. The two of us lying dead in that black field, the silent old man standing over us with a shotgun. "Don't stop," I screamed, my voice high and thin. Keep driving! Keep driving! He threw a kid down a well!" Mark, still reeling from the sudden eruption of terror, gripped the wheel. What the hell are you talking about?" I forced myself to breathe, forcing the words out in a desperate rush, explaining in agonizing detail what I had just witnessed. He understood the panic, the absolute necessity of my fear, but he asked if I was certain. Could I have been mistaken? Was it a trick of the light? I told him I was 100% sure. I had never been so sure of anything in my entire life. I finally found my phone, but when I pulled it out and looked at the screen, the sight chilled me further. 0 bars. No signal. We were isolated, cut off, trapped in this silent, burning landscape. My only option was the old, reliable paper map. I unfolded it, my hands shaking violently, searching for the nearest pinprick of civilization. Relief, sharp and painful, washed over me when I saw one mark just a few miles down the road. "Put your foot down," I urged Mark. "We have to get there now. We have to call 911. We rolled into the tiny, desolate town of Black Creek minutes later. The first building we saw was a low brick structure beside the highway called Sarah's Kitchen, a diner. Mark pulled into the gravel lot, the tires spitting loose stones. I didn't wait for him. I practically fell from the car and ran toward the door, bursting inside. Every head in the diner, all 6 or 7 of them, snapped toward me. The silence that followed was heavy and immediate. I stumbled up to the counter, breathless. "I need your phone, now." The woman behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with a kind but weary face, simply nodded and placed the handset on the counter. I dialed 911. As I spoke to the dispatcher, relaying the horrifying, unbelievable scene, the entire room listened in. A collective sharp gasp went through the diners when I described seeing the child thrown down the well. The dispatcher instructed me to stay put. The local sheriff would send a deputy over immediately. I hung up, placing the handset back in the diner, my body still vibrating with adrenaline. I turned around. Every person in Sarah's Kitchen was staring at me, not with hostility, but with an intense, unreadable curiosity. The lady behind the counter brought me a glass of ice water. Mark came over and put a steadying hand on my shoulder. We sat in a booth by the window, waiting for the arrival of the law. Then a man rose from his table and began to approach us. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrison. He asked about the fields. I told him every detail about the endless blackened acreage. He turned to a nearby table and asked a question that felt chillingly casual, naming the owner of the fields. Were those Arthur Blake's fields? Everyone nodded in solemn agreement. Mr. Harrison then asked me to describe the man I had seen. As I recounted the details, the dungarees, the thinning dark hair, the diners nodded again. It was Arthur Blake. They agreed his grandchildren had been staying with him that week while their parents were away. A ripple of shock and deep confusion spread through the small crowd. They knew Arthur Blake. They knew his family. To hear such a terrible accusation against one of their own seemed to break some fundamental law of their closed world. They asked me twice if I was sure, if I could possibly be mistaken. When I insisted I was never so sure of anything in my entire life, the disbelief curdled into something that sounded like collective dread. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Oh dear Lord." It felt like a lifetime passed before the deputy finally arrived. We went out to the car to talk, away from the prying, silent eyes inside the diner. I repeated the story for the third time, and I got the same reaction from the deputy. A slow, measured, "Are you sure, ma'am?" as if I had just described seeing a flying saucer. As he was questioning me, another police car, an older, heavier model, rolled into the lot. Out stepped the county sheriff, who had driven all the way from headquarters to handle this impossibility. The deputy saved me the fourth repetition by explaining my account to the sheriff. The sheriff, too, did the whole, "Huh, really?" thing, before walking off to talk quietly into his radio for a few minutes.
When he returned, he told us someone at headquarters had called Mr. Blake to ask him about the report. Arthur Blake, the sheriff explained, had no idea what I was talking about. He confirmed his grandson was staying with him, but insisted they hadn't been anywhere near the burned cornfields. By now, I was practically begging the sheriff to drive us back down the highway. "I can show you the exact well. I remember the spot." He flatly refused, stating he couldn't trespass on private land without a warrant. He had to speak with Mr. Blake personally first. I fought to keep my cool. I knew every second we argued, the less chance that boy had. He could be drowning or suffering from a fatal impact wound. I tried to convey the urgency, the fear of water, the fear of the fall. But the more animated and desperate I became, the more the sheriff and his deputy looked at me as if I were a lunatic traveler who had lost her bearings. I had to literally plead with the sheriff before he finally relented, giving his deputy a resigned nod. "Fine, go check the well on the Blake farm. Just check it." The relief was overwhelming. Mark kept repeating, "It's going to be okay. You'll see." The sheriff was leaning against his car, speaking into his radio, his face impassive. Then he straightened up and walked toward us, a triumphant look on his face. "Got some good news, ma'am," he announced. "First, the deputy confirms the well on that farm is empty. Second, Mr. Blake is on his way down here with his grandson right now, so you can see for yourself that everything's fine." I was speechless. I knew with every rational fiber of my being what I had witnessed. The sheriff seized the moment to explain, kindly, patronizingly, that I must have been mistaken. The movement I saw was probably just Mr. Blake picking up his child to show him the bottom of the well. The dropping was likely an optical illusion, a trick of speed and the black smoke. My brain was screaming. "How can the deputy be sure the well is empty?" I demanded. "Did he check for water? Could the kid be underwater or just out of reach of his flashlight?" The sheriff merely shook his head. They kept throwing around phrases like optical illusion and trick of the light. It started to sound less like concerned authority and more like a rehearsed defense. I understood the small-town mentality of protecting one's own, but their alarming lack of concern for a potentially dead child began to turn truly disturbing. Just as I was trying to hold my temper while explaining that I knew what I saw, the deputy's car returned. Following it was a beat-up old truck. It came to a stop, and out stepped a large man in dungarees with thinning dark hair. He was Arthur Blake. "Now who's this telling lies about me dropping my damn grandson down a well?" Arthur Blake demanded, his voice aggressive, accusatory. The sheriff stepped in quickly. "Hold on, Art. She's just trying to help." Arthur Blake strode to the passenger side of the truck, opened the door, and helped a small boy climb out. He marched the boy over to us, placing him directly in front of me. "There, that's the boy I supposedly threw down a well." Mark immediately whispered, "See, I told you, everything is fine." But everything was not fine. The boy I had seen thrown down the well had bright, curly, blonde hair. The boy standing in front of me had dark, closely cropped hair. I began to panic, my voice shaking as I explained that it was not the same child. The deputy tried to tell me I must have seen the sun catching the boy's dark hair. The collective effort to make me feel insane was overwhelming, but I knew that screaming would ruin my last chance. I asked if there was anyone else I could speak to. While the deputy was trying to assure me of their competence, the sheriff pulled Mark aside for a private conversation. Mark returned minutes later, his face pale and serious. "We need to leave now," he said quietly. The sheriff, he explained, had asked me if I was unstable. When Mark denied it, the sheriff gave him an ultimatum: get out of town immediately or face arrest on charges of public disturbance and slandering a good man's name. They could not have outsiders rolling into Black Creek spreading accusations. A horrible cold feeling crept over me. Something dark was happening here. But whatever it was, we were not going to uncover it in the parking lot of Sarah's kitchen. I faked a choked apology to Arthur Blake and his grandson, whoever that poor dark-haired child truly was. The second we were back on the road and had reception, I pulled out my phone and called the Iowa State Police, reporting the entire incident. I told them I suspected something deeply messed up was happening in that town, specifically on the farm of one Arthur Blake. They took the report, but later called back stating there was nothing to report. I went through the entire official complaints process, insisting my report was mishandled, but they got back to me again that everything possible had been done and there was still nothing to report. But I know what I saw. I have never had hallucinations. I do not need glasses, and I am not crazy. The image remains, an awful, silent piece of film running forever in my memory. A blue shirt, white sneakers, and a flash of white blonde hair disappearing into the black, empty throat of the earth.